In October 1942, a Boeing B drifted out of formation over the Netherlands, engine smoking, and went down largely intact. Within days it was on a flatbed heading for Richlin, the Luftwaffe's most secret testing airfield, the place where captured enemy aircraft went to be taken apart by the best engineers Germany had left. The man who climbed into the cockpit first was a test pilot named Hans Werner Lurch. His job was not to admire the aircraft. It was to find its weaknesses, write the report, move on. He had done this before with Spitfires, with P-38s. He assumed this would be the same. Here is the detail I want you to hold on to, because the whole story turns on it. Lurch wasn't stopped by the size of the B-17, or the 11-gun positions bristling out of it, or even the range. He was stopped by something almost boring: the rivets on the wing skin, evenly spaced to a tolerance his own engineers couldn't explain by hand, and a small drum-shaped instrument bolted into the nose that German intelligence had, technically, already stolen the blueprints for 3 years earlier. If you're enjoying stories like this, a like helps more people find them. That drum-shaped instrument was the Norden bomb sight, and the fact that Germany already had its plans on paper is the detail that makes this story worse than the one you already know, not better. Because what the Richlin engineers were about to learn wasn't a secret. It was a capability, and those are not the same thing. To understand why a bomb sight and a handful of rivets broke something in Germany's engineering establishment, you need to understand what Germany believed about itself in late 1942. Because this isn't a story about an airplane. It's a story about the moment a country that prided itself on precision looked at a machine built by people who had never built one before, and understood they were not looking at an opponent. They were looking at a different kind of war. By autumn 1942, Germany was not yet losing, not obviously. The Wehrmacht still held most of Europe. Stalingrad hadn't fallen. Rommel was still fighting in North Africa. But the whole plan rested on one assumption: that German engineering, German precision, German craft could outproduce a numerically larger enemy through sheer quality. Fewer tanks but better tanks. Fewer aircraft but better pilots flying them. That assumption is what the wreckage at Richlin was about to quietly dismantle, not with one shock, with a sequence of them. The first one started with the rivets. German aircraft in 1942 were still, in large part, hand-fitted. Messerschmitt's Bf-109 was an outstanding fighter, but it was built the way a fine instrument is built. Skilled hands, individual adjustment, a craftsman's judgment at every station. When Lurch's engineers ran their fingers along the B-17's fuselage skin, they expected the small human irregularities they saw on their own aircraft. They didn't find them. The rivet spacing repeated, station after station, like it had been decided once and then obeyed forever. That's not a compliment to American riveters. It's a description of a system that no longer needed the riveter to be exceptional. It only needed her to follow the jig. Remember that, because it's about to matter more than it sounds. Then came the Norden bomb sight. Here's where this story splits from the one you might expect. Germany didn't need to reverse engineer the Norden. A German-American engineer working at the Norden Company, Hermann Lang, had already handed detailed drawings to Nazi intelligence back in 1937 and 1938, smuggled out before the war even started. Luftwaffe engineers had built and tested a working model years before Lurch ever climbed into that cockpit at Richlin. So when the real thing came out of the wreckage of a real B-17, largely intact, the shock wasn't "we've never seen this." The shock was "we have seen this, we built one, and it still doesn't matter." Because a blueprint tells you what a machine does. It does not tell you how to build 12,000 of them to identical tolerance, fast enough to put one in every bomber rolling off 4 separate assembly lines a continent away. Germany had the secret. America had the factory. And a stolen secret loses to a factory every single time. That's the part that should sit with you. Erhard Milch, the Luftwaffe's state secretary, came to Richlin himself to see the aircraft. Adolf Galland, the general running Germany's day fighters, called it a machine that combined heavy armor, extraordinary altitude, colossal defensive firepower, and speed, all in one airframe. A combination the Luftwaffe simply had nothing to match. Notice what he didn't say. He didn't say it was better than a 109 in a turn, or faster than a fighter. He said it combined things Germany had never had to combine, because Germany had never needed to build a bomber that could fight its way to the target and back without an escort. That was the second layer of the shock. This bomber assumed it would be alone, assumed it would get shot at from every angle, and was built to survive that assumption at industrial scale. The third layer was the one that took longest to land, because it wasn't in the wreckage at all. It was in the numbers nobody at Richlin could see yet. By 1944, American factories were completing heavy bombers not as isolated triumphs of engineering, but as one item on an assembly schedule that also included tanks, trucks, Liberty ships, jeeps, and radios. Germany's entire wartime aircraft production, spread across the full length of the war, came to a little over 119,000 planes. The United States built roughly 96,000 aircraft in 1944 alone. Say that ratio out loud and it stops sounding like a production gap and starts sounding like a different century. Germany's own armaments minister, Albert Speer, would later admit that watching the American production curve climb while Germany's dispersed, bombed-out factories fought just to hold steady, was the moment he understood, privately, that the war's industrial math had already been decided. Here's the layer beneath that layer. The one that's easy to miss if you're only counting airplanes. The reason Germany couldn't close the gap wasn't a lack of good engineers. Richlin was full of them. It wasn't a lack of clever ideas. Germany was years ahead on jet propulsion, on guided weapons, on rocketry. The problem was that German industry still ran on the craftsman's model, the skilled worker who fitted, filed, and adjusted each part by hand until it was right. That model produces extraordinary individual machines. It does not scale, because it depends on a supply of irreplaceable people, and war is extremely good at making people replaceable in the worst possible way. American industry, by contrast, had spent the interwar years building something Germany hadn't: assembly lines where the precision lived in the tooling, not the worker. Riveters who'd been waitresses 8 months earlier could build to aircraft tolerance because the jig did the thinking the craftsman used to do. Remove the expert and a German line slowed to a crawl. Remove an American worker and another one, trained in weeks, stepped into an identical station and the line didn't notice. That is the same discovery Japanese engineers would make 2 years later on the other side of the planet, taking apart a B-29. Different ocean, different aircraft, same sentence written in aluminum. You are not behind. You are somewhere else entirely. So what did Germany do with that knowledge? Mostly, it doubled down on the thing that was already failing it. The Bf-109 and Fw-190 stayed in production for the rest of the war essentially as refinements of pre-war designs, extraordinary aircraft flown by an increasingly thin pool of increasingly exhausted pilots. Meanwhile, the four-engine bomber Germany actually needed to answer the B-17 and B-24 within kind. The program that became the He-177 was plagued for years by an engine arrangement so failure-prone that crews nicknamed it the Luftwaffenführerzug, the Luftwaffe's cigarette lighter, for its tendency to catch fire in the air. Germany never fielded a four-engine heavy bomber force, remotely comparable to what it had just watched come apart on a hangar floor at Richlin. Here is the ledger. Germany built roughly 1,443 Me-262 jets, the single clearest technological answer it produced to Allied air power, brilliant aircraft, built too late, fueled by an economy that was running out of fuel to give them. In the same stretch of time, American factories were turning out thousands of heavy bombers a year on production lines that had been building cars 18 months earlier. One side had the better idea on paper. The other side had the system that could actually build it 12,000 times. And that's the part the Richlin engineers understood before most of the German high command was willing to say out loud. They hadn't found a better airplane in that wreckage. They'd found proof of a country that could mass-produce things Germany could only hand-build. A stolen blueprint had told them what the enemy's machine could do. The wreckage told them something the blueprint never could: how fast, and how many, and how little it would cost the enemy to lose one and build the next. Hans Werner Lurch filed his report, and the aircraft, repainted and marked, spent the rest of the war touring German airfields so fighter pilots could study its weak points in person, learning where a Bf-109 could actually get through that wall of defensive fire. It's a strange kind of legacy for a captured bomber. Not a trophy, a training aid, an admission that the only way through was to keep looking for the gaps, because there was no version of the war where German industry simply outbuilt what that aircraft represented. After 1945, in a divided, flattened country, some of those same engineers went back to work in an industry being rebuilt almost from zero. And the lesson a lot of them carried forward wasn't about airplanes at all. It was about the jig, the tooling, the standardized part, the unglamorous machinery of a system that doesn't need every worker to be a master craftsman to build something extraordinary over and over on schedule. It's not a coincidence that within a generation, German manufacturing became a byword for exactly that kind of disciplined, tooled, repeatable precision at scale. They didn't learn it from a blueprint. They learned it from a wrecked bomber on a hangar floor at Richlin, and from the years it took to admit what that wreckage actually meant. Thanks for watching this one all the way through. If it was worth your time, a like helps it find more people who care about this kind of history. Subscribe if you want more of these. And if you had family who served in the war on any side, in any theater, tell their story in the comments. It deserves to be remembered too.